This is salsify, and salsify is a very interesting root that is supposed to taste like oysters. Before I get into this, I want to thank Wanderlust Nursery for sending this to me. They have these plants available on their website. So if you grow plants and are interested in growing this, check out their website right here. So what's interesting about this is that initially it was more popular as an ornamental thing. People would grow it for the flower, not for the root. This actually produces a cute little flower that sits at the top of it. I believe it's a little blue flower, and underneath that flower is this gigantic, ugly root like this, which is kind of weird to think of, but a lot of flowers are like that. Dandelions produce a big root. Chicory, which is like the root is used a lot in to make coffee substitutes and things like that. It also has a cute little flower at the top. So it's weird to think that sometimes if you see a little flower growing in nature, underground there might be this big nasty root. In the 18th century, this started to become popular as a cooking vegetable. So if you look at some really old 18th century cookbooks, you'll sometimes see this listed as an ingredient. And this was used as an ingredient in mock oyster dishes. So instead of getting oysters, which are very expensive, you can use this to give a flavor that is like oysters in cooking. So I'm a vegetarian. I was raised vegetarian. I don't know what oysters taste like. I have no idea. But I am going to try this, and I'm going to see if it maybe has kind of like a savory sort of flavor to it, or maybe like a fishy sort of flavor, or something that is vaguely like how I imagine an oyster would taste like. And the recipe that I'm going to follow is actually from an old cookbook, so let's experience the flavors of the 18th century. Who am I? Alright, so we're going to do this in front of the Hoosier today to keep everything vintage, although this is not an 18th century sort of thing. And the recipe that I am following said that you need to scrape off the skin, don't peel it, and then you put the pieces in salt water because it can discolor very quickly. So let's first lop off the top. It scrapes pretty easily. So I'm not sure why the recipes say to do this rather than peel it, but it does work pretty well, so maybe this is a faster way of doing it. Although it does make quite the mess. And as you can see, it is discoloring, so yeah, it's kind of, I don't know how this puzzle worked. I'm actually going to cut this into thirds just to stop some of that color changing when I'm putting it into the water, because by the time you peel everything, it's already going to be brown. So yeah, maybe this is the way to do it, to peel it into parts, because this does take a minute. And also, the recipe I'm looking at says that if there are dark spots on your salsify, to cut them out, because those dark spots can ruin the flavor of the dish. One dark spot can ruin the dish. It says to cut them in slices, so they cook quickly. I'm just going to do like 3/4 of an inch, something like that. Okay, I've got some water boiling here. I'm just gonna chuck that in there. And by the way, you can cook these however you want. You can cook them kind of like you'd cook a potato. So if you want to roast them or fry them or saute them, you can do that too. It might not be as starchy as a potato, but it should work for most purposes, I think. I'm boiling these because that is supposed to have the most oystery sort of flavor. The majority of the recipes that I'm looking at are using the water in there as well. And here's something that the one recipe I'm looking at says. It says, cook until tender only, not soft. The flavor of the oyster plant is in the water, so there should always be some liquid left to form part of the sauce. So that's why I'm doing it that way. And I saw a couple of videos online of people saying it doesn't really taste like oyster, but they were like roasting it or frying it. So if it's going to taste like oyster, this is the way to do it. And you got to prepare it kind of like a special sort of way also, which we'll get to in a second. But before that, I want to try a piece of this raw. So you can eat uncooked salsify, but the recommended way to be doing that is to eat it when it's very, very young. This one is not. So you should be cooking it when it looks like this. But I'm still going to give it a taste just to see what that is like. Weird. It's sweet, like a carrot, maybe a little bit less. It's a little bit starchy, but not much. Like a hint of like biting into a raw potato. But there's like a little, I don't know how to describe that. There's a little something else going on. Maybe that's the flavor of oysters. I would dare say that it's a little bit umami. That's maybe like a little bit salty also. There's definitely a little, like a taste in there that's kind of like MSG, but it's faint. It's not a very strong taste. Okay, you can tell these are done when they are fork tender. Yep. Looks like a teeny tiny little potato circle. Oh, that's wild. It tastes less like a potato and less like a carrot and more like a water chestnut. And the texture is different now too. It's softer, obviously. It's like somewhere between like a cooked carrot and a cooked potato, and also does still kind of have that whatever that's in the background, that kind of like slightly savory, salty sort of taste. I mean, now I cooked them in salt, so it's definitely going to taste like salt, but you know what I mean, like MSG sort of flavor. It's like something else going on in there. So I'm going to rescue these, but retain the water. Don't want to get rid of that water. This is too big. By the way, all the proportions here, the third cup of liquid, third cup of cream, tablespoon of butter, that's all random. I'm just coming up with this on my own. The recipe I'm looking at just says serve with cream and butter. It smells like mac and cheese, which I guess makes sense, because mac and cheese is mostly just butter and cream. This thing is strange. It tastes very different. A lot of the reviews I was looking at online were like, yeah, it tastes like a potato. It does not taste like a potato. It's definitely different. There is a slight potato-y quality to it, and a slight carrot sort of quality to it. But it's not like either of those. It's more, like I said, like water chestnut. That's like the most prominent taste that I can recognize. But there is something more to it. And when you put the butter and cream on it, I don't know, it takes you somewhere else. So another flavor that I'm picking up in this, and it's actually very strong, is corn. And maybe not just corn, but like a baby corn. I actually looked up a description of what oysters are supposed to taste like, and it said that oysters taste buttery, salty, and a little bit like cucumbers. This is buttery because I added butter to it. I guess maybe a little bit on its own. This is salty because I added salt to it, maybe a little bit on its own. And cucumbers, vaguely. I wouldn't think this was like a meat substitute or anything if someone gave it to me. There is like a slight savory flavor in here that I'm picking up that is not in potatoes or carrots. This is a little bit more savory than those things, but it's not a strong taste. What I can say is that it does taste really good, especially if you like things like buttered carrots and roasted potatoes with butter on it. It's sort of the same group, but it's its own unique thing. Whether or not this tastes like oysters, I'm not too sure, but one thing I did notice in my research, looking at all these old-timey recipes, a lot of recipes that called for this and labeled it as like a mock oyster soup or mock oyster dish, it also called for fish. So that might be a little bit of a deceptive description for this to say that it's an oyster-like thing. If you've had this before and you've had oysters and you swear these things taste like oysters, do let me know. I'd be interested in that, so leave a comment down below with your experience with it if you've had this before. Other than that, I think that's all I have to say. So again, thank you Wanderlust Nursery for sending this to me. These plants are available on their website if you grow things. Go and check it out, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. I would like to give a shout out to Smarter Every Day, AltPod, and the Harbor Leaf Tea Company. They are mega patrons over on Patreon.com. If you haven't heard of it, Patreon.com it's how this channel happens. It's how I can afford to keep this YouTube channel going. So if you haven't checked it out, please take a moment to go into the description below and click the link there. I also have t-shirts for sale over on my web store. A link to that is in the description as well. Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.